Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Joe. He's Nick, and you are listening to the Nick and Joe Show, coming to you live on ThinkRadio.ca, or the ThinkRadio.ca network, I should say. And I'm in the studio here in Canada's capital, the Think Radio studio, and Nick is out on the farm. And we apologize, just a few minutes late tonight. We were just sorting out a few minor technical difficulties. But we're here now, ladies and gentlemen, and Nick's out there. You there, Nick?
I am. I'm right here.
Good. I'm glad to hear you out there, Nick. I'm just trying to fix something on my computer because I can't quite see the output. There we go. Because, sometimes, I don't know if you ever get this on your computer. There we go. Where the that bottom bar or whatever doesn't close properly, so it stays open, and it ends up blocking stuff that you want to be able to see. Anyway, so I've just moved it over, and we are now cooking with gas.
You betcha.
All right. So, lots of things to talk about, and one of the things that we are not going to talk about, and just giving you guys a heads up, we're not going to talk about COVID tonight. I don't even know if we're going to mention it again. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody was perfectly aware of that. No, this is a no COVID zone tonight, ladies and gentlemen. And if you're at home, whether you've had your vaccination or not, I would say this: take your mask off. Take your mask off, put your feet up, and relax. Housekeeping item, Nick, as always, if people want to join into the chat room, join into the conversation live, all they have to do is click on the chat bubble. Sorry, I'm not articulating very well tonight. Chat bubble in the player, and if you have to register. If you're already registered, you may have to log in. That's to ensure that you are a real flesh and blood human being, not a malignant algorithm, lurking liberal, or roaming robot.
Roaming robot.
I think there was another word we used for robot.
Yeah. I can't remember.
Or a troublesome troll.
Yes. Or, something algorithm.
I did that one. A malignant algorithm.
Oh, that was it. Okay. So a troublesome troll. Yeah, that works. All of them wear the bright red L on the middle of their forehead. And you can use any word to fill in the rest of that, what comes behind that you want to, as long as you spell it IBERAL.
All right. Let's, Nick, we spent some time last week on the federal budget. There were a number of issues that we decided we wanted to address, and we did that. But I still think there were a couple of items that I wanted to just sort of to finish off the whole subject of the budget, if I could. So let's, with your permission, Nick, I want to go over a couple of items that are not necessarily monetary, but I think really, again, put the whole budget process and the whole mindset of the current government into some very good perspective. So, we're not going to spend the whole show tonight on the budget, but let's just spend about the first segment just sort of tying up the loose ends, Nick. And these are non-financial issues. Well, I shouldn't say they're not totally non-financial. They have financial implications, of course, but they're not completely focused on dollars and cents. And the first thing, Nick, I don't want to belabor this point, because we spoke a lot about it last week, this idea of the $250 million being allocated to tackle sexual misconduct in the military, and how we felt that was way too much money, way out of proportion. We talked about sexual harassment and assault in universities, and contrasted the number of people in universities and the whole number of universities, etc., with the number of people in the military under 100,000. And again, just to remind our listeners, so the federal government allocated in this budget $5.5 million to supporting sexual assault victims or centers in the Canada's 97 universities, at the same time that for a military of under 100,000 personnel, and by the way, there are 1.4 million students enrolled in Canadian universities at this time, under 100,000 military personnel, $250 million. Now, we had a lot of discussion around that last week. And just sort of to finish it up, Nick, I was going over the budget documents earlier today, and there was a phrase that I came across that I found just really troubling on this subject of the tackling sexual misconduct.
Yeah.
And I found it in the annex to the budget documents. And what the government was referring to was, again, eliminating sexual misconduct in the military and supporting survivors. Now, I don't mean to sound insensitive, but how is this? Is it really? Is that an appropriate term to use? Like, somebody said something that was inappropriate about my body if I'm a female personnel. And let's remember, in this day and age, sexual misconduct can cut both ways, okay? But
True.
let's make the assumption that we're talking about female personnel being subjected to inappropriate behavior by male personnel.
Okay.
If that's the case, and it's dealt with, is it really appropriate to characterize the person who was the victim or the target of this sexual harassment as a quote-unquote survivor? Doesn't that, in my view anyway, kind of diminish and belittle the whole experience of a woman who's actually been raped or worse?
Well, yeah, you're right, but I would carry it probably even a little bit further. When you hear the word victim, it's a very negative, not for the individual, for the individual is negative, but it's a very negative thing to be victimized, right? It's that phrase, that word, carries a lot of power. And when someone says, look, I'm a victim of, let's say, a landmine, or I'm a victim of a hit and run, these are very traumatic events. Sympathizes with the victim in that case. And I'm not suggesting that people who are, and I'm using their words now, a victim of sexual misconduct, but that could be, as you point out, anything from simply a comment about the female anatomy that's inappropriate by a male member, or as you pointed out, vice versa. This is when it really should be gender neutral. Who cares who made the comment? But obviously it's okay in a lot of cases for women to talk that way. But if you're a man, that's what the whole we movement was all about. But what happens is when you include someone who is gone through an inappropriate touch, okay, somebody gave let's just say some sergeant gave a private a pat in the butt. Now, if he'd done it to a guy, nobody would have said a thing, okay? But she feels that was inappropriate, so she makes a complaint. All right, so the guy's off caps. He marches in to see the colonel or whoever the head of his unit is, and he pays the price to the military justice system. End of story. The victim has been, the situation has been addressed. The idea that this woman, if she were to say, I'm a victim, that means there's an ongoing thing. She should say, well, I was a victim and it wasn't, what I'm trying to do is strike a balance between the word victim in its proper sense and the way that the left and the socialist, the virtue signalers want to use it. And what they include as victims, like someone who survives the Holocaust, is a victim. There's no question of that. Okay? It's not on the same scale. There is no moral equivalency between somebody who got an unwanted touch on the backside compared to somebody who went through Auschwitz or Dachau. It's not the same thing. It's the same thing with prisoners of war, or someone who is unjustly convicted of a crime and is now on death row. Okay, and that does happen. Those people are real victims. This is you're on one hand you're diluting the word victim, and on the other hand you're elevating the word to a status it should never have held, given the circumstances in which it is used. If that makes any sense.
Well, I think it does. I hear where you're going with it. By the way, just a little correction. You mentioned the we movement. I think you meant the Me Too movement.
I did. Yes.
Yeah, I knew you did, but a different scandal altogether. And we wouldn't want ourselves to be sued by the we people. The Me Too people, maybe. Well, what the heck? I guess we could stand to be sued by the we people as well.
Look at the attention we get.
Okay. Yeah, look, I again, Nick, we're on the same page with this. I just found that terminology to be very problematic. Again, without, diminishing the survivor status, if you want to use that term again, of people who have actually gone through an actual violent episode where they were attacked. Perhaps they were beaten, they were raped, they were imprisoned, kidnapped. I don't know, okay? I mean, you can conjure up all sorts of things, but, somebody gives you an inappropriate tap or says something that perhaps is, insensitive from a sexual point of view. And I just don't think that you rise to the level of survivor because you were the target of that. And I think it's important also just to sort of put the final sort of exclamation mark on this part of the discussion, Nick, and that is to, again, reiterate that in today's environment, while we continue to talk about sexual harassment and sexual misconduct as being exclusively male on female, the truth is that today, it cuts both ways, and it doesn't just cut both ways. It could be male on male. It could be female on female, and the continued sort of fixation on male on female misconduct is, I think, does a disservice because I think it overlooks the fact that there are these other classifications, these other dynamics that are going on, and I think it possibly discourages people who are victims. If, let's say, a straight woman who's being harassed by a lesbian woman in an all-female barracks, for instance. Okay, does that happen? I'd be surprised to learn that it doesn't happen. Is it really widespread? I'd be surprised to hear that it was widespread. But I think that it happens, and I think that we discourage female victims or targets of that kind of harassment, or worse, could be real victims of real sexual assaults. We discourage them from coming forward. So, I just wanted to put a sort of a finishing point on that whole discussion before I move on to a couple of other items in the budget. Just want to mention a couple of other items that may have been overlooked in the budget, in the budget documents. The first being that, again, here is the federal government deciding that it wants to implement or implicate itself